Nokia's history is multi-layered. From being the ubiquitous communicator to pushing the boundaries of smartphone cameras, the company has enjoyed a strong mix of nostalgia and, well, current notoriety. And now, Nokia is making a return in the US market with the 5G UW-enabled Verizon smartphone that still tries to bring some of the best parts of their past. But for a phone like this that might be really exciting, we have to take this phone layer by layer. So that's exactly what we're going to do. This is Pocket Now, and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here are my thoughts on the Nokia 8V 5G UW. Nokia is coming out the gate with a large phone that sports a big display, which is to say it's a little big for one-handed usage. Pure Display is Nokia's way of saying that this is an HDR-capable IPS display. It is a Full HD Plus panel, which ultimately means it's not going to be an overachiever, but definitely brings the right amount of quality that you'd want in the company's closest thing to a full-on flagship. I have a good enough time working on it, whether I'm going through the general interface, watching some media, or playing some games. But it's a 60Hz panel. Coupled with the resolution, what you get is a good, if not run-of-the-mill display experience. What I'm sure some people will be miffed about is the bezel situation. There's a bit more chin here than there is forehead, which already houses a hole punch for the front-facing camera. Now, we're used to this kind of thing already, but what I will say is that even if it does cut into the content a little bit, at least there's a lot of screen real estate to play with. Some of you might get the itches seeing me go out of order on the layers, but it's like peeling back an onion. We have to get the skin off before we can get to what's underneath. And for a phone this large, the shell has plenty to show for it. Nokia's Finnish roots show in the minimalism that permeates the entire design, completing the shell with a glass backing over what looks like a slightly textured meteor gray look. The glass reflects light in a simple but effective manner, giving the phone a nice shine. Now, this kind of design is a bit of a double-edged sword though. While it is great that things are simple and minimalistic, sometimes it keeps the design from being eye-catching. I find myself to be pretty much in the middle with this phone. Now, between the two glass sides is an aluminum frame with extra tricks worn right on the sleeve. First off, there's a fingerprint reader right in the power button. And then there's an extra button on the left side which works with the Google Assistant. And then here on the bottom there is a headphone jack, which I'm sure some of you will be really happy to find. Speaking of audio, there's also just one speaker here on the bottom. It gets quite loud, which is cool, but as far as richness is concerned, I applaud it for not being tinny, although it can use some more body. And finally, in this layer, Nokia makes clear that their cooling system helps the phone from running hot. That performance is due to the Snapdragon 765G. Clearly, Nokia was hoping for at least a little bit of gaming to be done on this phone. It's no surprise that this phone can get that job done, given how well the 765G has proven itself in the mid-range segment. What is a little bit of a bummer though is that this slightly altered version of the Nokia 8.3 sheds down to 6GB of RAM and 64GB of onboard storage that, to be fair, is expandable. But this all powers Nokia's version of Android, which could be considered minimalistic if it weren't for the phone's ties to Verizon. See, Nokia keeps things pretty simple in the base layer, providing Google over on the side of the home screens and keeping the extra features to a bare minimum, but the bloatware is just kind of hard to ignore. I know that you can uninstall a lot of these apps, but I can't help but question why some of these were included in the first place. Let's give the Snapdragon 765G a little bit more gaming credit and put games that are better than Solitaire. I know Disney Plus as a pre-installed app is a Verizon thing, but then you get the official Panera Bread app. And finally, it's kind of weird to me that Apple Music is the app pre-installed on an Android phone. But all of that aside, ultimately from the display to the performance package, there's very little to complain about because the Nokia 8V hits all of the necessary marks. It doesn't excel in any particular way, but if you're looking for a good everyday smartphone with a bit more screen real estate that can last a whole day with a 4500 mAh battery, well, Nokia has provided it in this package. But the shift from 8.3 to 8V does bring a couple of real changes, which brings us to the core of the onion we've been peeling back. Here's where Nokia's partnerships are on full display. We'll start with Verizon and the support for 5G ultra-wideband. I actually don't have a whole lot to say about this part of the phone, but that might be the case for the vast majority of you out there anyway. The reason why is because while this phone's millimeter wave capabilities are noteworthy, it's not something that's widely available. I live in the greater Los Angeles area, and I know that the millimeter wave nodes are at least a drive away from my location. 5G in general is becoming more proliferated, which means it's great to see that 5G logo in the top corner, but it's still a conversation of potential rather than tangible gains. Which brings us to the camera, supported by Zeiss Optics. We'll start with the front-facing camera, which is an impressive 24-megapixel shooter for some selfies. Self-portraits can be enhanced with some Zeiss filters and even some special effects applied to any bokeh that might be behind you. Pictures from the front ultimately look fine in good lighting, but I would rather this camera shoot 4K video than give me fun bokeh in the stills. So that leaves the rear camera, which is a 64 megapixel shooter backed by a 12 megapixel ultrawide as well as a couple of support sensors. The depth sensor is obviously there for the portrait mode, while the 2 megapixel macro lens can actually be used for video. You'll notice there's a slight warping effect outside of the subject, which is something that macro lenses can sometimes provide. Say what you will about macro lenses in general, I thought it was kind of funny how the macro lens kind of looks like a zoom button in the camera interface, but clearly it's not. Now on the flip side, you get the ultra-wide camera, which is a good enough performer that Nokia makes sure to use it to good extent. It can be used in many of the modes, including the cinema video mode, where you can record at 4K resolution, which is pretty great. And that finally brings us to the main sensor, which is a large 64 megapixel sensor that Nokia supported with quite a few features and modes. Straight out of the camera, pictures are generally really pleasing but do tend toward cooler colors, which means in some shots the cooler color temperature might make certain elements seem a bit washed out. Detail is still high, and I have to give this lens props for its depth of field. In both photos and videos, there's a very distinct separation between the subject and its background. Night mode shots are hit or miss, but low light performance on this main sensor is already pretty good, so it's just a boost that you can try if needed. Clearly I want to focus on video because Nokia did so themselves by including a dedicated cinema mode. Before swiping over there, you can always just go to the auto video mode and shoot up to 4K at 60 frames with HDR enhancements available. But when you get to the cinema mode, you can continue shooting at basically auto settings, though this is where you get the more filmic 24 frames per second, which is my preference. It's also here that you can lock down or manually adjust any of the typical settings like shutter speed and focus. However, videos from the cinema mode can be further edited in the phone after shooting with different color profiles, especially if you record in the H-Log profile, a flat color space that adds dynamic range and can be color graded with a number of built-in looks. And finally, in non-H-Log footage from cinema mode, you can get all J.J. Abrams with it and add some Zeiss lens flares. Now, the log recording and editing is not something new, but I really like how it's implemented in the camera app and editor. Normally, color grading is a tedious and intensive process, but the Nokia software can just add it in and then make the colors pop, or make them moody if you want. Couple all of this with the satisfying video quality alongside what I find to be an aggressive and mostly impressive electronic stabilization, and this phone can be quite the creator's tool. Photos are good, video happens to be somewhat overachieving, and it seems the partnership with Zeiss is paying off in what is actually considered a mid-range smartphone. So it's pretty safe to say that I was pleasantly surprised with the camera offered here on the Nokia 8V. Overall, Nokia is finding their footing again in the US market, and thanks to Verizon and Zeiss, they've created a phone that deserves a closer look. Now, for those of you on Verizon looking to save a little bit of money, but still wanting good media consumption and a creation experience with quite a lot of potential, I actually think the Nokia 8V 5G UW is a compelling option. And at $699, you can get all of this with Verizon's high-speed internet, 5G ultra-wideband or not, supporting you. Let me know what you think of the Nokia 8V 5G UW in the comment sections down below. At the very least, drop some likes on the video and subscribe to Pocketnow if you haven't already for videos that are basically coming out every single day. With all that said, however, I will call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in our next video.